Well, two new polls show that Australians are losing trust in the Albanese government. Resolve Political Monitor shows that Labor's primary has fallen to 28%, while the Coalition's is sitting at 36%. The Herald reports that Labor's primary is now at the lowest level since Resolve polling began 3 years ago. It's also the first time Dutton has eclipsed Albanese only just in the poll as preferred PM. And Freshwater Strategies research shows Albanese has lost significant ground to Peter Dutton, just 2 percentage points ahead now as preferred PM. And for the first time, receiving a lower approval rating than the opposition leader. Joining me now, former Labor Minister Graham Richardson and Scott Morrison's former Press Secretary Andrew Carswell. Richo, Andrew, good to see you both. Now, Richo, a primary of 28% for Labor. If you believe these figures, if they've got them right, 28% is brutal for Labor. Should your mate Albo be worried by these polls?
I think anybody who doesn't worry about a 28% poll's got to be kidding themselves. It is a very poor result, and it causes, I think, concern for every Labor supporter in the country.
I mean, the primary that Labor got at the last election was 33%. Already that was historic lows. But since then, Albanese, I mean, he had a long honeymoon, but now the cost of living crisis, so many other scandals, the detainees who've been released and are causing havoc. I mean, all of this is now denting the view, the perception in voters' minds about the Prime Minister's competence. I mean, Andrew, do you think, though, that Dutton is surging ahead enough to win the election?
Well, Sharri, it's an awfully hard road ahead for the Coalition. The numbers are astronomical, but they are on the right track, and Peter Dutton is putting every foot forward to put himself in that position, and he's becoming a credible alternative to the Prime Ministership. As you said before, he is the preferred Prime Minister at this point in time, which is remarkable. And it's remarkable considering that the Labor Party have spent the last 2 years saying that this bloke is unelectable, that he's unlikable. And they've convinced themselves of this narrative that, you know, no matter what happens in their own government or the scandals, the negativity, the stumbles that they have, in the back of their minds, they're thinking, but at least we're not Peter Dutton, at least, you know, we're electable and he's not electable. And they've convinced themselves of this narrative. And the Australian people are seeing another side to this because Peter Dutton is speaking sense to situations where people are being frustrated. Cost of living, energy prices, immigration, crime. He's speaking sense in all those areas, and the Labor Party have vacated the field on these issues.
I mean, Labor Party thought Tony Abbott was unelectable. They thought Scott Morrison was unelectable in 2019. They thought Dutton was unelectable. Richo, what do you think? Do you think voters are starting to have a second look at Peter Dutton and thinking, oh, maybe he is prime ministerial material?
Yeah, I think there's some truth in that. I think Dutton's been doing very well. He's certainly picking the right issues to speak on, and I think he's just, burrowing away underneath the government and I think undermining them. I think he's doing pretty well.
Now, leading economists are predicting that we're not going to have a rate cut until next year, and some economists, like Warren Hogan, say there could even be not just one but 2 rate rises this year. Have a look.
Why are you so insistent the Reserve Bank should raise rates once or twice more?
Yeah, it's not that I'm insistent, I just think that's where we'll end up. I don't want to see a rate hike any more than the next person, but the inflation we've got in our economy is not going to go away on its own. The level of the cash rate of 4.35 does not appear to be high enough to get it back down to target.
I mean, Richo, the prospect of another rate rise, maybe even 2, is brutal for families already really struggling.
Oh yeah, that's a political disaster if that happens. Not every economist agrees. You never get economists to agree on anything. But this is a pretty serious issue for Labor and not something that they can dismiss. I mean, the more they see of Dutton, people like him, and I think Labor expected the opposite to happen. Well, it didn't. And so Labor are going to have to be very careful over the coming months because, Dutton's he just keeps going, Dutton. You can't stop him. And I think he's doing particularly well, and I think he's doing much better than anyone in the Labor Party thought possible.
Yeah, Andrew, I mean, this is another reason why Labor will be unlikely to go to the polls this year. If rates go up and if the cost of living crisis gets worse than it is now, and, you know, I mean, Labor says it stands for vulnerable Australians, and families are doing it tough.
They are doing it tough, Sharri, and I think they've moved from frustration to anger now because there isn't enough being done to address that cost of living pressure. Now, the government have set themselves up here in a very awkward manner, progressing to a potential election later this year. They have made the gamble in the budget that inflation will track down lower, and therefore there will be scope for the RBA to move on interest rates. That is no guarantee, and every day it has passed since the budget is looking like the other way. So the more likely now we're looking at a May election. It is an awful big gamble to be considering December when cost of living will only increase, and there'll be no prospect of a rate decrease. Yeah,
well, you'd want to hope, for the sake of families out there, that Labor has got the cost of living under control by early next year at the very latest. Now, just quick last topic before you go. Richo, I've been speaking on the show tonight about Australian journalist Cheng Lei and the bullying tactics that Chinese officials showed towards her today. What do you think about Albanese failing to properly condemn this today?
I think he could have said more, and I think he should have. This is a serious issue. I think China's the sort of great big bully in the area, and unfortunately, because they're our biggest trading partner, I think sometimes we're reluctant to stand up and go as hard as we should. And in this case, we must go harder because I think it's fundamental to what a democracy like Australia stands for.
Yeah, well said. Andrew, I mean, the government you worked for, you were press secretary to Scott Morrison. Well, you went very hard on China, some would say too hard. What do you think about the current government's approach?
Well, I'll give them a tick for the economic side of it, that there is a huge advantage for the normalisation of this relationship. But let's not fool ourselves here. This is, on the outside, this is a different China to the one that Morrison faced. There's no longer the bully boy pulpit, there's no longer the wolf warrior diplomacy that we're seeing, but we're still seeing belligerent acts from a belligerent communist government. We're seeing acts against our Navy, we're seeing cyber warfare, and we're seeing what we saw today with Cheng Lei. We're seeing a different China, but completely different to the one that we had to deal with in our government.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Richo, Andrew Carswell, thank you both very much.